Five, four, three, two, one.
We're live. This is the human condition. I'm Vince Orlando. You can call me Sniffles because I'll be sniffling quite often tonight.
I'm Sean Davis.
Sean, how you doing?
I'm doing good. How you doing?
Fantastic, man. I'm much better than last episode. Still in that mold infested place I call a home, but packing, and we're moving out. So I'm excited about that. But I'm good. Life's good. Kids are good. Business is good.
It's only the mold.
It's the mold, man. It's just the mold. I sleep with it. It rolls with me in the morning when I get out of bed. I mean, it is what it is.
It goes where I go.
Yeah, it goes where I go. Before we start, just want to let everybody know if you want to get a hold of us, obviously there's Facebook. You can chime in here, and we don't have Steve here today. He's down in Memphis, I believe. But we'll get back to you as always, and you can also reach us on Twitter, HC Podcast 313. Today, we're talking about compassion. Compassion's a term that I think pretty much everybody's familiar with. Often viewed as an emotion or an action, right? The reason I wanted to talk about it is because it's so much more, and science has proven that compassion itself is a force. So compassion, unlike empathy, right? Because sometimes people confuse the two. Compassion, unlike empathy, which is, you empathize, you can feel the feelings of other people. Compassion is different in that compassion demands action of some sort. Doesn't mean you're going to take action, but you're compelled to help or sit with somebody in their suffering. And compassion literally means to suffer with. Coming from the Latin root word, literally means to suffer with. So compassion is different from it's different from empathy, in that empathy you can empathize without having the drive, the desire to take action, to do something about it. Empaths sometimes just sit in energy and they absorb it, and they don't know what to do with it. Compassion can be confusing with altruism. It's not altruism, although compassion can be a conduit to altruism, to where just selflessly you want to give of yourself because you recognize the suffering in others or animals or whatever the case is. But the real interesting thing about compassion and the way I started to understand compassion as a force, same type of force that gravity is, same type of force that electromagnetism is, the strong and the weak nuclear forces. Greg Braden took one of his expeditions to a monastery in Tibet, and I believe this one in particular was a 16-day trek. He'd been there a couple of times before. On this occasion, he got to speak with one of the abbots, if not the lead abbot. I can't remember exactly, but one of the abbots nonetheless. And this is a person who lives 16 miles above sea level, something like that. Sits there and meditates. And within their community, they do their best to give that energy to the universe. So Greg asks the abbot, he says, what's the binding force of the universe? What is it that holds everything together? Kind of asking, what is this field, this what they used to call ether, the oneness, what is it? And the abbot looks at him and he says, compassion. And it was confusing to Greg because, he thought of it like most people do. It's, well, isn't that an emotion? Isn't that something that you do in action? He didn't ask that question then. He just stood there confused, and then he asked again, let me get this straight. And the abbot says again, compassion. So some years go by, and Greg remains confused by this. Takes another excursion to another monastery in Tibet. Gets to speak with the abbot, and he asks the same question. And he says, I asked this before, and I still don't really understand what this means, but what's the binding force? What's the thing that holds everything together? And the abbot looked at him, and he said the same thing. He said, compassion. in his native language. And Greg says, "But how?" And I thought that was an emotion, an emotion that prompted action. And the abbot and his translator looked at each other and they kind of smiled. And he translated back to Greg. He said, "It's both." So for me, and for Greg also, that was extremely profound because to think of compassion as the force, the binding force, the thing that holds everything together in this universe, it brings on a whole new different meaning because every human being possesses this trait, right? If you look at a kid who hasn't taught to hate yet, they're empathetic, but they're also compassionate. I remember my daughter, she was maybe 2. She's 2 years old, I think. We were at a bounce house over on the east side. And she couldn't use words that good yet. She could speak, right? But she nowhere near eloquent. She could understand things pretty well. But there's this little girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old. She's she's bawling. I don't know if she can't find her father or her mother or whoever. And she's just sitting there bawling, crying her eyes out. And I watched my daughter walk up to her. She doesn't have any words to use, but I can tell she feels what's going on. And she doesn't know how to ask, "Are you okay?" or "Do you need anything?" She just stands in front of this little girl. And it was a little African American girl. There's no color. There's no nothing going on there. It's just this person is in pain. I need to sit with them. She walks over to this little girl and she just stands there, looks at her, and I can feel the pain in her eyes. And the little girl's kind of oblivious to Sophia being there. She's crying, 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 crying. And then she looks up. At some point, she notices Sophia's presence, and she looks up at her, and they lock eyes. And just this feeling, like this feeling took over the entire room. And she was done. Just like that. She saw that somebody else was sitting with her in her pain, whatever it was. She stopped crying instantly. Probably about 2 minutes after, these two just staring at each other and now smiling at each other, not saying a word. The father comes over and finds his daughter, and they go about their business, bouncing, whatever it is they're doing. But I'll never forget that moment. And when I heard Greg speak about compassion as a force, the driving force of the universe, the glue that holds all things together, that's what I equated to. Moments like that. You know what I mean?
I was thinking about this all day. My deep tissue massage lady, we were talking on Friday, and she was like, "You just have to treat every human being and every opportunity and every interaction with love and compassion." But if you practice it, even while you're driving, I was like, I'm just gonna start going with the mind frame of love and compassion. I would say mantras and stuff, and I'm doing all this stuff over the weekend, and I found myself just totally in harmony with everything. And I didn't. It's just interesting to treat everyone with it and see what happens.
Including yourself.
Yeah.
And that's the tough one. Is being compassionate towards yourself. I find it's easier to be compassionate with others than it is with myself. A lot of times, and then compassion falls short because really the driving force is here. Right, but people, if we speak of the mirror effect, right? Well, they're there to pull that out of us. And when you meditate, and I don't know that everybody feels this, but I think for the most part it's fairly common. When you get into this transcendental state of meditation, you feel love. There's nothing else there. Love, compassion. There's no questions to be asked. It's perfect. And it's that feels more real to me than anything else. And And I can only equate that, you know, and I've had those experiences with DMT and near-death experiences, and but I've also had it in the love that I feel for my children. So it, if it feels every time I experience it, if it feels more real than anything, experientially, I have to say that is the truth.
Right. So, what divides the soul? You know, I was thinking about that, like hate. Hate will divide the soul. Um, you know, and you know, even just being resentful, all the negative energy, whatever, is going to divide the soul.
And that's all. That's all ego based.
Right.
Yeah.
So I can't afford the luxury. It's not even a luxury. I refuse to have a divided soul today. I just can't see any worth in having a divided soul.
Wish that was the case with everyone, right?
You know, I'll tell you, I get cut off. I don't like, man, they must have to be somewhere real important. If they get there, okay.
I have to force that out, but I'll say those things.
But I don't even have to force it right now.
That's a beautiful thing.
It's just
You're in a good
everything is
space.
real smooth. You know, and you know, I've taken the spiritual practices to another level. I also started messing around with this book. This guy, you know, when they cut that program at work, and before the last group, he was like, dude, would you sponsor me seeing it as like there's no group and I'm not going to be part of it, you know, I'm not going to be a client anymore. And I was like, sure, man, whatever, you know, yeah, we'll do this. And he's a very, very, very spiritual, well-grounded individual. Went through some hardships and stuff, and it was really hard because like when you come from the recovery angle, like you want to be like, man, you got to go to meetings and you got to do this. The first meeting I had with him, I've been doing yoga an hour every morning, and I've been meditating for an hour, hour and a half every morning. He's like, my spiritual practice is very solid. I don't really like them 12-step meetings. He's like, I understand what the basis is for them. He's like, but through my own spiritual means and exploring, you know, I'm good. You know, I'm working, and he works at a stamping plant. It's funny because you wouldn't expect him to work at a stamping plant.
No, that's the beautiful thing about humans.
And I was like, how is it? And he was like, it's great for now. He's like, I just kind of look at it as service. And I think when you have a purpose, driving force, that I have to use that before I need to wake up with it. I need to go to sleep with it. I need to use it 24/7.
And you know, it is the force, right? It is that force. And when we feel in disarray, which for the most part we do, it's the human condition, it's because we egoically work in opposition to what we know is the truth. Now, consciously, we might not know it as the truth because we're not programmed that way. We're not programmed to be compassionate. Not for the most part. You know, it's consumerism and materialism, selfishness. You know, that's the society we've been brought up in for the most part as Americans, and it's not just Americans. It's worldwide. But we're separate, and the feeling of separateness, it's hard to be compassionate about anything because individualism is a lie.
but I'll have compassion for someone who's still asleep, you know? like all that materialistic shit and the consumerism that people are so focused on and ego driven, I don't really look at them as awakened. I look at them as that they're still asleep.
Well, right, and there's compassion there because compassionately you
And I
want
have
to
to be
do
compassionate.
some shit like this.
I have to be compassionate towards them because they don't know.
Right.
And you can't, like, you can only offer love and compassion to someone that's still asleep. And whatever they do with it, they do. But you never know that it might awaken someone.
It could, and that's all it is there's a block there.
Right.
And maybe one of the things that you say or do is the thing that allows them to pierce that veil.
Go up to them and tell them that the ego serves no purpose. See what the fuck
Well,
happens.
first, I don't know what the fuck are you talking about?
Man, well, we were in the Course of Miracles, man. I was telling you about it last week. They go into a lot of that. The ego really has no purpose. That if you are
Truly, not spiritually. It
well,
doesn't.
if I take the concept that I am one with God and I am one with God's kingdom, that I am not separate, that everything flows in through me. And the thing that wants to trick you into thinking that you're separate or that there needs to be conflict is the ego.
Right, but see, that's where, so from the standpoint of the Course in Miracles, from the deeply spiritual truth, oneness. This is our truth. You're right. The ego has no purpose. It stands in antithesis to that truth. But in the human condition, and the way I believe it is, there's a reason for all of this, right? We're here to learn how to love better. I believe how to be more compassionate. So, from a physical perspective, here in the material plane, the ego, the only purpose it serves is for you to learn how to quash it, right? Like that's what it's there for. Because by transcending the ego, you now can experience greater levels of compassion. Because I feel like, well, if you're just a soul, right? If we are spiritual beings having a human experience, and we're perfect and we're one, what do you need besides that, right? I believe this is a challenge, and this is just, and I don't think I'm being unrealistic in that viewpoint, and I think other spiritual traditions would say that this is there's a challenge here for us to meet so that we can evolve whatever God is. If we're one with God and however you view God.
What is the challenge?
The challenge is to transcend the ego. It's to experience what we would call Christ consciousness, to walk the earth plane, but transcend that, like somebody like Martin Luther King does, or Mahatma Gandhi, or Christ, obviously, the Buddha. There's all these enlightened people, and they weren't always enlightened, right? There were challenges that they had to meet. Christ was crucified on the cross, for Christ's sake. You know what I mean? But so they still had to. They knew the truth. They walked in their truth, but they still had to deal with very human things. And I think you become godlike, whatever God is. If you can't even think in terms of God, you become one with Source. When you transcend this illusion of separateness, which is what the ego is, you can only do that with compassion. So if you do that, well, you become reunited with Source, whatever your version of Source is, and you feel it. You feel it in transcendental meditation. You feel it when your first child's born. You feel it in near-death experiences, and then you come back to the ego, and the ego plays tricks on you and brings you back into, well, no, these five senses, that's the truth. That's crazy. You must have been crazy to feel that. Fuck that.
There comes a time in your spiritual development where what you just said, like, nah, fuck that. That ain't real. the other way and you take it in and you say, this is real.
This is the truth.
This is the truth.
This is the truth.
Like, why am I denying the truth?
Mm-hmm.
You start saying, why am I denying the truth? My ego is going to go a little haywire. Because like, now it knows something is up.
It's in survival mode.
Right.
It has
It's like he's starting to get too much information.
Yeah.
You know? And so I always want to be consciously aware of, like, I'll still see my ego kind of do things in a way where, you know, comes to want or wanting to do things my way, something like that. But like, what I'm trying to always keep is that it really has, it's like a bell that rings on a door, but all the people in the house are hearing it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It doesn't really serve a purpose. It may serve a purpose for someone else that comes to that house.
Yeah.
But for those that live there, it doesn't really serve a purpose. So I had to, like, you know, it come and it go. You know, it comes and it goes. But man, then of course miracles, like they were talking about, like when they were talking about God and stuff, like it was a whole different take. Like God doesn't teach you lessons. So that would mean that God has an ego. And if God has an ego, like that's not God.
Right.
And so, you know, people like
God doesn't punish you.
right. So they were saying, the guy that was reading the book, it said that in these ways, when we get in disconnect, when my ego disconnects me from the kingdom and God, these things that God does or these lessons, they're not really lessons because God is not a teacher.
Oh, they're just there. You've asked for these things.
Right.
You've asked for them.
Right.
I need this to transcend.
So the lessons that we define as lessons is the answers from God. And I was like, man, that's some, you know, fucking around with the phone. I'm like, let me hear that one again. You know,
it's so true though. You know, people talk about prayer, and you know, I read this book by Greg Braden, Lost Mode of Prayer, probably the best book I've ever read on prayer as a technology. And I realized that I'm always praying. I am always praying.
Yeah.
Always from the moment I, you know, and I have to work real hard to make sure that it's not my subconscious prayers that are being answered because my subconscious is still flawed, deeply flawed.
I think there comes a time where you just transcend into an energy field where you're in prayer, you're living there.
I think you are anyway, but you can live in low energy prayer.
Right.
You know, and that's when, you know, for the person who's, you know, oh, please give me that job, please give me that job. Well, what you're communicating with the universe, God, source, whatever you want to call it, is that I don't have.
Right.
I don't have lack,
limitation.
limitation.
Act as if you have that job.
So yeah,
Act as if that job is waiting for you to show up to it.
and that's something you have to train yourself to do because we're taught, you know, and it's, you can't really blame people because this is an egocentric plane that we exist on. So we're taught to rely. How do we get food when we're a baby? We cry. You know what I mean? So for this not to be a lesson, I mean, and look, maybe we are all worm food, right? Maybe just by some freakish chance we all wound up here and there is no meaning to this whatsoever. There's too many even scientific facts that point to there's something deeper, right? But take the traditional idea of what God is, this man in the clouds, take that out of the equation and just say at one point we're all a part of source. There's so much beauty in that. There's so much compassion in that for us to get to where we are now as human beings, to be able to contemplate ourselves, our existence, what the source is a beautiful thing. So and when you go to the places where compassion, where you know that this is the truth, where you feel that, it negates the possibility that there is no meaning to this. You know, that just the whole thing seems too perfect. You're born crying, you're born needing. Now you need to learn how to detach from that. You can't get caught up in that, because otherwise you suffer. And suffering, as the Buddhists would say, well, it's just a part of life. And it's meant to transcend, right? So suffering, but it is an option. You don't have to suffer. You can transcend this.
What did you say at the beginning? Compassion is suffering?
Well, you can be compassionate about suffering.
Yeah.
But what compassion means literally is to suffer with.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's to suffer with.
Suffer
It's a multiple. It's you're this being and another being suffering together. That's compassion. Because, you know, would you need compassion without suffering? If it's the driving force of the universe, you know,
I think you can be compassionate even when there's no suffering.
what would you need to be compassionate about? You know what I mean?
Well, if you walk around,
I mean, I guess you're compassionate to your child, who's not suffering. You just know when to feed your child, and you know when to change their diaper.
what about the lady at the hot food counter at Holiday Market? You know, I'm compassionate towards her when I see her,
Yeah, compassionate. Why? Just because?
just because she's a human being.
See, and that's the force aspect. That's not the human aspect. That's what Greg Braden discovered when he spoke with his
It's
abbot.
a lot of fun to be in the force.
That it's the driving force, man. It's
It's a lot of fun, and like when you come across a very egocentric person, that compassion, you know, it's like an axe taking a swing at a tree, you know, that you hopefully break down that ego slowly or fast. It doesn't matter, but eventually the ego must die.
You know what? You have to be compassionate towards your ego too. That's the mistake I made for years and years and years as the spiritual journey started for me after my son was born. Is that I became abusive towards my ego and real dismissive, and it was the same abuse I endured as a child. The same type of
verbal
neglect, the same kind of neglect, the same kind of abandonment I was doing to the part of me that was really only trying to protect me as best it could. I don't need you now. I don't need you now. And I would do that with other people too. I would get real high and mighty and judgmental. I didn't know any better at the time. This is step one in that spiritual path, but I was doing it to myself, and it would lead to more suffering, because you can't do that. I got to go back to my ego and say, look, you didn't know any better. You did the best you could to protect me. We don't need to do that now. You know, it's that kid that's still in me, that's still calling shots. I love you, and I appreciate what you did, and yes, you protected me in times when I needed it. We're not there anymore. You know, we're gonna have to part ways, but I can't let you run the show.
You just have to come up with a new playbook.
A new play, and can we work together? Can we work together?
Yeah.
You know, there's no need to be afraid anymore. But you can't have that conversation if you're judging, right?
No.
If you're judging
No,
yourself,
you can't.
why are you so stupid? Why'd you do that dumb shit?
You can't judge the judgment like comes from the ego 100%. So I have to make peace with whatever I've done in the past during the spiritual journey to get me to where I'm at now, and realize that, you know, I'll probably still make decisions based out of the ego every now and then, but you know, it's for like it doesn't have as much input anymore. You know, it just
Not as much power.
Nah, it just and it don't even really like come out a whole lot. You know, uh, what's the point? You know, like when you hear gossip or you people talking about other people in a negative manner, it's like, dude, like, what's the point? I don't give a fuck. You know, like, it, how is that helping?
It's not. You know, it's not. And you got to be compassionate for that too, because we were there at one point.
True.
You know,
True.
you see people
Yeah.
in the back and forth on politics, and it's like, oh man, both. And even though I may agree with one side over the other, the way you're both doing it is wrong. And you're doing everything you're doing is an antithesis to compare. I mean, I don't agree with most of what Trump does, but I'm compassionate in that. Look, it took some abuse for him to get that way, right?
He is who he is.
Right.
What am I gonna hate that?
Which people do.
That's fine, but like-
polarize and they'll hate.
But it doesn't change anything.
Nothing for the better.
You know, you can scream, you know, from the rooftops how much you hate him, but he is who he is. He's the same guy that won the election that he is now. There's nothing that's changed.
No,
Nothing's changed.
Where you find compassion, if you view people compassionately, even when you disagree with them, you can at least look at their stances that you disagree with, and you can say, well, what led to that? And get curious instead
Fear.
of judgmental.
Fear is huge.
Right. Well, there's a lot of things, but I think people don't ask that question. They get so angry because they're so caught up in what their egoic viewpoint is and their attachment on the way things should be that they forget to ask the question, what led to that? That's an important question to ask.
You know, it's interesting that you, like, funny story. I'm on the Nextdoor.com app. Because, like, I put my flyer up there for some snow removal here and there. And, I don't know, man, there was a post about Berkeley and how the Klan had been there. And funny thing is, like, if you grew up in Berkeley, like, you knew that. But there aren't a whole lot of residents that actually have been there long enough to know the history of it. And, you know, this guy, I think he had some newspaper articles or something, Klan parade. It was the first Veterans Day ever, like 1929 or something. And Coolidge had just got paid for some shit. And so he posts this on Nextdoor.com, and everyone starts getting, you know, like, what the hell is this? And, you know, and I was scrolling down because after a while, what people were saying is like, there's probably still Berkeley residents that have descendants that are living there, and we need to stop this form of domestic terrorism. And so you go from something that was informative and just recognizing the past to now I need to find descendants of whoever lived in Berkeley,
Right.
who might have or not, who may or may not have been a Klan member. You don't know, but they must have descendants living in Berkeley, and we must go after them now. And it's that type of thinking that has got this country where it's at.
Oh, it's
Like,
not
let me
just this
attack
country.
you. And it's funny because, like, I gave them all, like, a real good, because, like, ain't no one owned the house that I lived in. It's never been outside our family. You know, my dad lives at the house he grew up in, and it was built in '46. And you know, back then, this whole area was designed for GIs that were coming home from World War II. And so what happened before, like all that Klan shit, believe it or not, Shrine of the Little Flower is aimed at Berkeley because of the Klan. They wanted it aimed at Berkeley as like, this is our shield against you.
Mm.
you know, and not a lot of people know that history. And you know, Berkeley Masonic Temple and the Odd Fellows building was huge, like Berkeley, the Bears Den and all that stuff. But you know, I gave them all this huge history, and they were like, "Wow, like how'd you know all this?" And it's like, a lot of us knew this stuff. You know, like my principal over at Nora came in and told us about the history of the community we lived in when we was in seventh grade. Like we became educated about that shit. But to see how people react to it now, you know, kill them, like get the pitchforks out, you know, and it's like,
That's the generational things to get angry.
yeah, and
Find
because
something to be
that's
angry
your
about.
fear.
And well, and it is a life force, anger, right? And that comes from lack of feeling alive without that type of stimulation. You know, we were talking about earlier the instant gratification, the inability to
Yeah.
delay gratification, and it's near impossible for this generation. I mean, everything's at their fingertips whenever they want it. You know what I mean? My kids wouldn't know what to do without the internet, and you know, so I have to ration that out. But this is we live in a time that the at least the planet that we know and inhabit has never experienced. This is such a new thing, and if you go about your days lacking compassion in the actions that you take, which most people are, because anger, you feel something, you want to feel alive, you feel connected, you can connect to that anger. So let me get angry, and it's real easy to hide behind the guise of virtuosity, because okay, well, the Klan is bad, right?
Right.
So let's get angry about that, because well, you don't do anything by being angry about it. Anger can be used in a positive way. You can take anger. You know, Martin Luther King was angry in the way that his people were treated, but he spun that in the direction of love, spun that in the direction of compassion. He'll never be forgotten, and the impact that he made on this planet and the people that surrounded him and the people that today he's one of my heroes. That still absolutely adore what he did. Did he sacrifice, give the greatest sacrifice of his life? He did. But look at the end result. That's when you turn that anger into compassion. You don't do that by saying, let's get them. You know what I mean? Mob mentality, even if your mob mentality is on the side of probably what? Virtuosity.
Yeah.
You know, Jordan Peterson, when I went to one of his lectures out in San Diego, he said, look, it's okay to want to punch somebody, right? You know, to have that feeling. He's like, but you really have to evaluate yourself if you're always getting angry, because maybe you're just a son of a bitch who likes to hit people, and you found ways to do it and justify it. I was like, it's true.
Yeah.
You know, that's what we got a lot of right now on the left, the right, the whatever, the trolls. I mean, it's just hate. And even if your hate is aimed at a hateful group, well, all you're doing is feeding the hate to that group. It's just hate. It's the flip side of the same coin. You're justified when you go after Trump, and because you don't like what he does, and you start calling him names, and he's this, he's that, and what do you think you do to him? Do you think he's really going to sit there and go, you know what? Maybe they're right. Maybe I should really think about. No, he's going to say, see, they're attacking me. Fuck you. You know what I mean? And that's all that happens. That's the lack of compassion.
What happens if we looked at the past as merely as lack of consciousness, rather than critique the fuck out of it, judge it, look for ancestors and all the other bullshit? What happens if we just looked at the past as merely a lack of consciousness?
Didn't know better. That's a compassionate way to view that. Do I agree with a lot of the things that happen? Fuck no. But I have to find a way to be compassionate somewhat, in that, whatever happened to this person led to this. And that's why I took the kids to Auschwitz, and not to scare them, but to let them know that when human suffering goes unattended, which humans do, we suffer. When it goes unattended, this right here is the culmination. This is this example of You know, so if you look at it, a person like Hitler, he suffered greatly. And what happened? He got ostracized and alienated. And he just happened to be a genius. And he happened to have a skill in mobilizing people. But it was all hate driven, right?
Right.
And you got to kind of sympathize with the fact that he went through what he went through. Is what he did absolutely despicable? Did he deserve to be wiped off this planet? Yes, he did. In the way that he was, or we think he was, who knows? But you know, the reality is, you gain nothing by hating. You gain nothing by hating. Hate begets hate begets hate begets hate.
You know what I think? So all the hate pushers and all that stuff, I really think it's a cry for I'm suffering, but they don't know how to say I'm suffering.
Well, what Marianne Williamson would say is all in the Course in Miracles. Every act of hate, quote unquote hate, is really a cry for love.
Right.
In a distorted way, because they don't know how to say it.
Yeah.
It's a cry.
Maybe you should go
please.
up to them and say, look, I feel you. I think you could use a little love and compassion in your life, and see what their response would be.
And it might not be good. You know what I mean?
It could be good.
It could be. It might not. You know, the guy who's
It's
about
all
to
in the opportunity.
to
Vince.
cut
It's
your-
all, yeah, it's all in the opportunity.
well, you think about the guy who's about to cut your head off, right?
Yeah.
Because they're a terrorist and they're going to do
Right.
it, and probably not going to get through to that person. Right? They're so far gone. But then there's the person that you might get through to. Luckily, we're not experiencing that. But that's when the lack of compassion. That's when it gets out of control, right? Because we experience a lack of compassion on a daily basis. People just don't give a shit about the other person for the most part, right? It's me, and you got to be compassionate because that's the way they were raised, and society supports that. But
You have more than me. I can't have that.
No.
I need to have more than you.
because now I feel less than.
My ego needs to be stroked and fed. God damn it.
Well, that goes back to compassion for yourself. I lack compassion for myself a lot. I have to force compassion on the, you know, and I know better. I know better. I know what it feels like to stand in the dark. I know what it feels like to stand in the light. And sometimes it's just so goddamn comfortable in the dark that I'll find myself hanging out there for a minute. I don't stay long anymore, but and I have to be compassionate about that back and forth because I would love to embody Christ consciousness at least for a day before I leave this planet, just to have it be so second nature that I don't have to constantly monitor myself. But that's not the case yet, you know, and I have to be compassionate about the fact that that's not the case yet. You know these things, you know them, goddammit, you know them. Why can't it just be second nature, you know? Then sometimes I'll get that way on myself, and that's not good. It's not good. You put yourself in that. Perfection isn't a real thing, you know. It's a disease. Perfectionism. It's one that I had for a long time, and it kept me so stuck and so filled with discontent for everything, including myself. Took a lot of trauma to find ways to break that. I don't know how to. I think if we taught our kids the importance of compassion and mindfulness, and if we taught them these things when they were young, we wouldn't have the problem that we have, you know. But the powers that be don't want to allow that. Because if you don't need anything, if I don't need to buy that new car,
Control.
That's a
I
problem.
need to have control.
I don't give a fuck about that car. I don't need that shit. What do I need those clothes for? I'm good. I'm good with just me and my companions and you know, and I'm good with just being a human. Wait, no. I need to be rich. I need to be rich and I need to be in control. Society doesn't allow for it. The internet's the great equalizer, though. It really is. If people use it in the right way, it's the access to the information that we
You really
have
think
now.
it's an equalizer?
Absolutely. You know, that even if you don't know what mindfulness is, you don't know what yoga is and what the intent is, it's common language now. People know these. I didn't know what in my neighborhood. I didn't have access to this shit. We didn't have the internet. I didn't know what mindfulness was. the only time I learned that it was bad to be a sociopath, I didn't even know what that was, but I really didn't have feelings towards other people. I didn't know how to, because I was so driven in self, because I was so insecure and as an abandoned and abused child, it was all about me. I didn't know how to have it be in another way. I never grew up. So I went to juvie, and I was in a program when I was 15. And that's where I learned the terms that I know now, so sociopath and empathy. And then I said, wow, am I really like that? And and I got time to ground myself in those places, and it changed me. At 15, it didn't mean I changed overnight, but I had a hold of some new concepts that really resonated with me, and it changed the course of my life at 15. And now you can type it up. Now you can stumble on it. You can also type up porn. You can type up everything. But for the people who are looking to know that they're connected to somebody, just somebody else out there feels like me, you can find it now. And to me, that's powerful. Is all the other bullshit, is it destructive? Yeah, but it's yin and yang, right? You know what I mean? It's the flow of the universe. So for those of us that are driving towards a light, that's why I post every day. I don't give a shit who likes it. But if something resonates with me, and I feel a certain way, well, goddamn it, somebody else might feel that way too, and maybe somebody needs that. It's just a way to push a little bit of good into the universe. Maybe it does nothing, you know what I mean? But it's a way to speak to more than just yourself, In Course in Miracles, Christ, they'll talk about they don't say mastermind, but Christ, where two or more are gathered in my name, there I am. There's power in getting those thoughts out there.
Yeah, I listened to it all the way through a few times, and now at night, man, I've just been finding a spot. It's 11 hours.
Yeah.
But
and it's a life study.
Yeah. They start talking about ability, how ability and accomplishment, and how ability is the potential for accomplishment, and how it comes about from source, and how you align yourself with it, and eliminating the ego from what I consider to be ability and stuff like that. It was really.
Well, think about it. If you're truly compassionate, if that is the force of the universe, if all subatomic particles interact compassionately, which they must because we're here, right? And if you look at the human population, as bad as we say it is, it continues to grow. As bad as parents, we can say, have been in the past, well, they knew how to feed us, they knew how to change our diapers. There was no real benefit in that. There was just some innate compassion that, that led me. I mean, just think about it. When you were back in the cave days, somehow you knew innately how to care for this child, and through compassion, the universe continues to expand, and even down to the subatomic particles. If you say compassion as a force, well, it continues to breathe forth life in all various types of ways. A supernova, which we view as cataclysmic, well, that pushes life out. You know what I mean? And that's compassionate interaction. That's consciousness. I come from the consciousness first worldview, as opposed to the materialist worldview, where it's, there were atoms, and from the atoms, eventually that sprung forth consciousness. We can't track consciousness. We don't know where it came from. We're going to say it came from matter, even though we have no evidence of that. So to me, it feels like the entire universe is conscious. And that consciousness is what we call God, or source, or the universe, or, whatever it is. And if that is source, how could it not be compassionate? We've done bad things, right? We've done good things, but we've done bad things, but we're allowed to redeem ourselves. Some people don't, and that's just the way it is. But for those of us that are alive right now, and then we'll wake up tomorrow, and with those eyes opening and that first breath coming in, there's opportunity to do better than you did the day before. How is that not compassionate? That's fucking compassion. You know what I mean? If I've ever experienced it in my life, it's that every day I got a new shot.
You have to always be willing to change your perspective.
Yeah, well, yeah, you do.
Because there was a day when I wasn't like waking up like, this is a new opportunity
Yeah.
for growth.
When am I gonna die? The fuck? How am I
Yeah.
still here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why am I still here?
I remember those days.
I told you to kill myself. You know, God, I told you that I wanted to die, and
Yeah.
I'm still here.
Son of a bitch.
What's your fucking problem?
Let me test you today. Let me see if I can make this happen. No, I'm not going to kill myself because there is an innate faith. Innate faith. You have this innate faith that it's not that bad. It doesn't matter on the surface what we're going through. We can get real down and out on ourselves to the point of almost suicide. And I've felt that feeling, that emptiness, but there was a deep-seated faith in me that would not allow me to carry it out. You know, but I felt what it's like to be like, logistically, it would be easier to leave, and sometimes it would. You know what I mean? Logistically, but there's this compassion and drive towards the next day that even in my darkest moments carried me from one to the next and to the next. And I'm in jail, and somehow I carried myself through that, and you know I can't say that I've been fully homeless because by the grace of God I've had friends and family to fall on. So I don't know what that type of loneliness is like either, you know, but I do know what it's like to be in complete darkness. And I sympathize greatly with the people who do truly commit suicide. The ones that they don't tell anybody, there's no warning signs, they just truly want to go. I don't know what that darkness feels like. I remember watching a movie with a friend of mine, and it was with Bradley Cooper, Star is Born, and we know the ending, and she said that's so selfish, and I looked at her and I said, do you know how dark that place must have been? So I don't believe that was a selfish act. That was a very painful act. Darkness that you obviously have never even come close to.
Thanks, Vince. I haven't seen the movie yet.
Oh, I fucked it up. You didn't see? It's a remake. it's a remake, but yeah. So we're getting the symbol anyway. You got anything you wanna drive us home with?
Look into the book. Be Here Now.
That's
Ram Dass.
yeah, Ram Dass. Yeah,
It's
yeah.
someone gave it to me earlier this week, and I've been messing around with it. And
I love Ram Dass.
it's a book that'll change your whole spiritual perspective.
He's an amazing spiritual being. All right, compassion first. Do that. Make sure you do that. Yeah. So I look further into it. Compassion, yes, it's an act. Yes, it's an emotion. But if you look at it as the binding force of all that is, it takes on a whole new meaning.
Don't be afraid of it.
Don't be. I was scared shitless of it, you know. But
Most of us were.
now I let it carry me, and I don't do it all the time, you know. But because it is the driving force, it pulls me out of some shit, you know. It allows me to be. It allows me to move in the trajectory of the man that I envision myself being. You know, one day maybe I will embody that consciousness that to where I'm unattached to everything but love everything and you know, when somebody cuts me off on the road, I don't motherfuck them. That would be a great day. It would be a great day. But that's it for today. That's
The human condition.
That's the human condition. Keep chiming in. Love your messages. Love your show ideas. We got a guest coming, and we'll announce that at the next episode. Steve should be back next episode. We don't know what we're talking about yet, so keep chiming in and